Hello, and welcome to this iSystem video, where we explain the configuration changes in the new version of winIDEA 9.21 and why they were necessary. Why we need the change. Technologies are constantly evolving, and so is winIDEA to match the needs of embedded software engineers ever since 1995. That's why we've developed the multi-memory space concept, or MMS for short, which is a new way of configuring the debug session. So, what is MMS and why is the new configuration procedure necessary? It has everything to do with the evolution of microcontrollers and the applications running on them. Today, simple applications running on one or more cores might still be the most common, but new microcontrollers have gotten so big that they are now called Systems on Chip, or SoC for short, and are running not only applications, but also other software components, such as hypervisors and virtual machines. Traditionally, this meant a very complex debugging configuration, but now, with MMS, it's simple. Let's remind ourselves of some basic concepts. In order for the microcontroller or SoC to run code, we have to transfer the binary file to it first. Because the binary file might not contain the necessary debug information, we also need to load the ELF file into winIDEA in order to debug. If you have multiple applications running on the SoC, they all have separate ELF files. In the new winIDEA, you can now configure each application separately and then switch debugging contexts on the fly. So how does this work? On your SoC, you have applications that run inside separate memory spaces. We call that a process, and it gets assigned a unique ID. In winIDEA, you just choose which process you want to debug, and the debug context will switch to it. That's the multi in multi-memory space. All of this means that the configuration dialogues are now different. But don't worry, even if you don't need MMS, we used this opportunity to make configuration easier for everyone. We even added a wizard to help you get started. Though you'll really only have to think about that when you're creating a new project workspace. When you open your old workspace in the new winIDEA 9.21, the configuration will be automatically converted. What's different? Let's take a quick tour through the configuration dialogues to see where you can find these settings in case you need to adjust them. The settings we talked about used to be configured in the following dialogues: emulation options, where you selected the device you're working on; files for download, where you listed the program and symbol files; and operating system, where you specified the operating system in use, of course, if you used one. The settings in these dialogues were there to prepare your application and device for the debug session. So now, we've replaced all three dialogues with just one, session configuration. In this dialog, you configure settings separately for applications and SoCs. You can also think of it as the hardware part and the software part of the debug session. Let's take a look into the SoCs part first. The target device is listed here. If we double-click it, we can explore the available settings. On the SoC page, you'll find the target device selection. You can also configure the active probe here if you're using one. The Configure button will take you to the CPU options dialog, which hasn't changed, besides moving the navigation tabs from the top to the side of the dialog. You'll also find this text, which offers a short explanation of the configuration options in the dialog. However, if you'd like a more in-depth explanation, click the Help button, and the appropriate help chapter will open up. Now let's take a look at the Memory Spaces page. In our case, we have one application running on our SoC, so one memory space is created. Listed on the Program Files page are all of the files that are programmed to the memory storage of your SoC. We've looked into some of the SoC settings, so now let's take a look into the application settings. This is where all of the applications are listed. Double-click the application for which you'd like to adjust the settings. On the first page of the newly opened dialog, you can edit the name of your application. Listed on the Symbol Files page are the files that contain debug information for winIDEA. This is usually one ELF file. If you were using a single ELF file for both programming and debug information, you should list the same file here as in the previously mentioned Program Files dialog. Remember, each application running on your SoC has its own ELF file. If you want to configure additional settings, like specifying an OS, visit our help by pressing F1 or clicking the Help button below, where all of the options are explained in detail. Creating a new workspace. Creating a new project workspace has never been easier, as the sequence of dialogues will guide you through the process. First, choose the name of your workspace and select the location for the project. By default, the selected debugger type is iSystem Development Tools, which includes our Blue Box hardware debuggers. I'd like to remind you, though, that if you get stuck along the way, just click the Help button for further explanation. So let's create a workspace. Now we need to select the debugger hardware. winIDEA detects all the blue boxes that are connected via USB connection to your PC. If your blue box is connected using a network connection and isn't listed here, click the Later button and type in the IP address manually in the Hardware menu. I'm using a blue box connected to my PC via USB, so I'll select this one and click Accept. The next step is to select the SoC you're using for your project. Just start typing the name of your device, and the selection will quickly narrow down. Now you need to specify the ELF file. If you're using a separate binary file for programming, like a Motorola S file, select this option here and choose that file. I'm using an ELF file for both programming and debug information, so I'll select this option. And that's more or less it. By clicking OK, the new workspace will open with the minimum configuration required to download your code to your SoC and start a debug session. For additional settings, such as specifying an OS or SMP, go to the Session Configuration dialog. This button here will take you there directly. All the configurations you've made so far will be saved. If you're a first-time user, I highly recommend following our step-by-step Getting Started tutorial, which will guide you through setting up your hardware, creating your workspace, and navigating the debug windows. I'm happy with these settings, so I'll just click OK and start debugging. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.